Chapter 5, Goods in Financial Markets, the ISLM Model. The interest rate affects output through investment, and output affects the interest rate through money demand. So it is necessary to consider the simultaneous determination of output and interest rates. Hicks and Hansen developed ISLM model to explain Keynesian analysis of how goods and financial markets interact to determine output and interest rates simultaneously. This requires simultaneous equilibrium in the goods and financial markets. Learning objectives. Understand the determinants of investment. Interpret and explain the IS relation. Explain what factors cause the IS curve to shift. Interpret and explain the LM relation. Explain what factors cause the LM curve to shift. Understand what is meant by equilibrium in the ISLM model. Learning objectives. Examine the effects of fiscal policy in the ISLM model. Examine the effects of monetary policy in the ISLM model. Discuss what is meant by the policy mix. Explain how factors other than monetary and fiscal policy can affect the ISLM model. Re-examine the implications of the ISLM model when dynamics are introduced. In Chapter 3, investment was considered fixed. In this chapter, we study the behavior of investment. Equation 5.1 above shows the investment relation. It says investment depends primarily on two factors. 1. The level of sales Y. Increase in sales leads to increase in investment. And 2. The interest rate. Increase in interest rate leads to a fall in investment. We continue to assume inventory investment equals 0, so production is always equal to sales. Equation 5.2 shows equilibrium in the goods market exists when production, left side of the equation, is equal to the demand for goods, right side of the equation, or in other words, Y equals Z. This condition is called the IS relation. Equation 5.2 shows for a given value of the interest rate, demand is an increasing function of output for two reasons. Increase in output leads to increase in income, disposable income, and hence consumption. Increase in output also leads to increase in investment. In Figure 5-1, ZZ curve shows that demand for goods is an increasing function of output. Slope of ZZ is less than 1, assuming that increase in output does not lead to a one-for-one increase in demand. Equilibrium requires that the demand for goods be equal to output. On the graph, we see that the equilibrium is at point A, where the demand curve intersects the 45-degree line. Remember, at each point on a 45-degree line, demand is equal to output. This shows equilibrium in the goods market for a given interest rate. This is the Keynesian cross diagram. Now, consider how a change in interest rates will affect the equilibrium output through a change in investment. Figure 5-2 shows, starting with a given interest rate, equilibrium is at point A as shown on the two graphs. An increase in the interest rate decreases the demand for goods at any level of output. Remember, investment is negatively related to the interest rate. This causes the ZZ curve to shift down. The new curve ZZ prime intersects the 45-degree line at a lower level of output, leading to a decrease in the equilibrium level of output. Equilibrium in the goods market implies that an increase in the interest rate leads to a decrease in output. Point A prime reflects the new equilibrium output corresponding to the higher interest rate. The IS curve is, therefore, downward sloping. Each point on the IS curve shows combinations of interest rate and output at which the goods market is in equilibrium, holding G and T and C0 constant. Figure 5-3 shows changes in factors that decrease the demand for goods for a given interest rate shift the IS curve to the left. Changes in factors that increase the demand for goods given the interest rate shift the IS curve to the right. Changes in G, T, or C0 will shift the IS curve. Increase in T or decrease in G or decrease in C0 shifts IS to the left. Use Keynesian cross diagram to see how this happens. Equation 5.3 shows equilibrium in the financial markets where real money supply equals real money demand. Starting with the original equation showing money supply equals money demand given by M equals nominal income times a function of nominal interest rate. Divide both sides by P so the equation becomes M over P equals real income times a function of nominal interest rate. We want to show simultaneous determination of interest rate and output. The goods market equilibrium was translated in terms of the IS curve. We want to depict the financial market equilibrium in terms of a diagram with interest rate I on the vertical axis and income Y on the horizontal axis. In figure 5-4, starting at point A in the graph A, we get the corresponding point A in graph B, showing interest rate and equilibrium income for which the original money demand curve is drawn. To get point A prime on diagram B, we start by allowing increase in income from Y to Y prime. This causes money demand curve to shift to the right in graph A and causes equilibrium interest rate to increase to I prime. When this combination of higher income Y prime and I prime is plotted on diagram B, it translates to point A prime. LM curve is upward sloping, showing higher economic activity puts upward pressure on interest rates. Figure 5-5 shows if M increases or P decreases, real money supply will increase. So for a given Y and unchanged money demand curve, equilibrium interest rate will be lower. This will result in shifting the LM curve lower since for a given income level, the interest rate at which the financial market is in equilibrium is lower. This shows effect of monetary policy changes on the LM curve. If, on the other hand, real money stock goes down, LM will shift up. Figure 5-6 shows together IS and LM curves determine output and interest rate at which both markets are in equilibrium. This happens at point A where the two curves intersect. At any point other than A, either the goods market or the financial market or both would be out of equilibrium. This is a very useful diagram for understanding impact of fiscal and monetary policies. Fiscal policy measures shift the IS curve, monetary policy shifts LM curve. As you saw before in figure 5-3, figure 5-7a above shows that an increase in taxes shifts IS curve to the left. In words, increase in taxes decreases disposable income and hence consumption. Equilibrium income will go down by a multiple of the initial decline in income. Economy moves from point B to C. Figure 5-7b shows change in taxes have no effect on the LM curve. In general, a curve shifts in response to a change in exogenous variables that appear directly in the equation for that curve. Figure 5-7c shows effect of increase in taxes on equilibrium output and the equilibrium interest rate. You can see that when the IS curve shifts to the left to IS prime, new equilibrium is at point A prime where IS prime intersects the unchanged LM curve. Increase in taxes leads to a decrease in equilibrium output and interest rate. Economy moves from point A to A prime. It moves along the LM curve. Decrease in income causes decrease in interest rate. Now, consider impact of increase in taxes on the components of demand, C, I, and G. Consumption will definitely lower since disposable income is lower. G is unchanged by assumption. Effect on investment I is ambiguous/uncertain because lower interest rate will increase investment, whereas lower Y will decrease investment. Important conclusion. In the short run, deficit reduction may or may not decrease investment. Or, to understand debates regarding effective fiscal policy on investment in the short run, it is good to remember that fiscal contraction, increase in taxes, may decrease investment, or a fiscal expansion may increase investment. Figure 5-8 shows effect of monetary policy on equilibrium output and interest rate. Note 1. Monetary policy does not affect the IS curve, only the LM curve. Increase in money supply, monetary expansion, shifts the LM curve down. 2. New equilibrium output is higher while new equilibrium interest rate is lower. The economy moves along the IS curve from A to A prime. 3. Increase in money supply leads to a decrease in interest rate. Lower interest rate leads to increase in investment and in turn increase in demand and output. 4. What is the effect of monetary expansion on the components of demand? Consumption increases because income increases. Government spending remains unchanged. Investment definitely increases since income is higher and interest rate is lower, and they both lead to an increase in investment. Table 5-1 summarizes the effects of fiscal and monetary policy. The same method can be used to look at changes other than changes in policy, such as the effects of a decrease in consumer confidence through its effect on consumption demand, or the effects of, say, an introduction of more convenient credit cards through the effects on the demand for money. Figure 1 shows the U.S. recession of 2001, lasting from March 2001 to September 2001. Figure 2 shows how the Fed followed an expansionary monetary policy by aggressively reducing the federal funds rate starting at early 2001. Figure 3 shows U.S. federal government revenues and spending as ratios of GDP from 1999 to 2002. Revenues declined and spending increased during the recession of 2001, not only because of the slowing economy, but because Congress implemented an expansionary fiscal policy by cutting taxes and increasing spending. Figure 4 is a graphical depiction of the impact of U.S. recession and the mix of fiscal and monetary measures used to deal with it using IS-LM model. Fall in investment demand caused the IS curve to shift to the left from IS to IS double prime. Expansionary fiscal policy shifted IS double prime to the right to IS prime. At the same time, expansionary monetary policy shifted LM to LM prime. Economy finally settles at A prime. Output is lower and interest rate is lower compared to A, indicating a recession, but it was much higher than at A double prime, the level that would have prevailed in the absence of policy responses. Figure 5-9 shows the empirical effects of an increase in the federal funds rate. In the short run, an increase in the federal funds rate leads to a decrease in output and to an increase in unemployment. It takes almost 2 years for the effects to be realized. Figure 5-9 shows increase in federal funds rate has very little effect on the price level. This supports the assumption of fixed prices and the assumption that in the short run, production responds to demand without a change in prices, and therefore output depends on demand in the short run.